Hi, welcome to Tech Takeaways. I'm your co-host, Jason Fitzgerald, and I'm joined as ever by Paul Stringfellow. In this week's episode, we're going to be talking about Microsoft Copilot, so Microsoft's new AI features, how they're going to be bringing into Office 365 and how they will be presented to businesses for adoption. So AI is a topic that we've discussed quite a lot.
AI is a topic?
Yeah.
Who knew?
Pretty much Tech Takeaway Season 1.
Yeah.
So we're keen to bring this to the audience because certainly this week we've had a lot of interest in this. You know, organisations kind of coming to us and saying, we've seen Copilot, we want to get some licenses in place so that we can start to deal with it. But we know, based on last seasons, that AI isn't all that. You know, it's not all singing and dancing, and in some cases there's a few considerations that you need to make before it.
That's like, I was about to say things about Father Christmas, but you know, Jason's just about to become a dad, so the whole Father Christmas thing, got to be careful.
Yeah, let's not.
For our young viewers. I mean, you're right, and we wanted to talk about Copilot, but you know, partly because this year, so kind of in January, Microsoft announced a couple of big changes to the way you could access Copilot, which has made it available to a much broader audience than it was previously. So prior to Christmas, so Microsoft kind of made Copilot generally available back end of last year, November time. But initially, there's some restrictions on who and how you could buy Copilot. So you needed at least to buy 300 licenses. The current pricing is $30 per license for Copilot.
So quite expensive.
It's not cheap. And I think even to a point where even now, with some of the changes, you know, it remains at that kind of price. So organisations who are thinking, I'll just turn Copilot on for everybody. Well, and bear in mind, everybody's going to cost you an extra $30, 25 quid, £25 per user per month, and you have to sign up for 12 months. So you can't just say, well, I'll give it a go for everybody for a month, see how that plays out. Sorry, go on.
So what does a company get for that, though? You know, that's quite an expensive license. Yeah. Where's the value in that license?
So I think that's a great question. And so there's a couple of things to think about with Copilot. So there are versions of. So, you know, if you want to try out Copilot as in terms of the Gen AI built on the same GPT engine that ChatGPT is built on, you can just go to Bing, go to Bing, press the Copilot button on Bing, and you can ask it to, you know, find out information, draft me something. They've got, an image creator in there. So, you know, Microsoft have made available for free quite a lot of capabilities around generative AI type stuff. So there's that, and you can do that for free. And actually, if you've got a Microsoft 365 account, you can log into that same service and get the enterprise version. So it's still free, but it means that Microsoft don't take the information that you feed into the Copilot engine inside of Bing and use that as part of their broader learning model.
So that's a massive risk. That's things that we spoke about last year actually with ChatGPT. Yeah. You know, there were a couple of stories last year around organisations putting potentially sensitive or corporate information into ChatGPT and then it being kind of regurgitated to someone else that wasn't part of the company. So with Copilot, that will securely ring fence essentially that corporate data so that it's exposed to your company only.
So let's come back to that because that's a big. So this part where you're using Bing is not isn't made generally available across an organisation. This is just using a public service, but because you're logging in with Microsoft 365, it puts a little bit of a guardrail around how that information is then used by Microsoft to teach its GPT model. So it's worth bearing in mind, actually, when you use Bing, it is GPT-4. So you're not getting everything that's 2 years out of date, still telling you news that's 2 years old. Okay. So that's a useful add-on. But beyond that, you've then got two paid-for versions of Copilot. So there's what's called Copilot Pro, which is actually about £20 a month. So it's the equivalent of the paid-for version of ChatGPT, pretty much. So some of you may be kind of familiar with you can use that. So it's kind of part of that, but it's based on an individual, and you sign up for a Pro license, and say it's about £20 a month. And then there is then Copilot for 365, which is kind of really the point of what we wanted to talk about today. So Copilot for 365 enables for each licensed user the ability to use Copilot across multiple parts of the 365 stack. So most people will see it doing things like be part of your Office suite. So it will sit in Word, it'll sit in PowerPoint, it'll sit in Outlook, and it will allow you to do things. So, for example, you can go into PowerPoint and Word and potentially say, from this Word document, create me a PowerPoint deck. And Copilot can go away and do
powerful,
that.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and so there's lots of nice little productivity ideas, and I will call them ideas for now. So, for example, you could go into Outlook and say, hey, just pull me the most important emails that I'm likely to be interested in today. So basically, all the ones I send you, Copilot would learn just to put in a bin and save you having to do it. So it's that kind of kind of build. So you get that, and I think that's where most people are going to see it. And actually things like with Teams, the ability
I've seen this actually, yeah.
Yeah, so with Teams, it gives you the ability that you have Copilot kind of running in Teams, and at the end of a meeting, you can basically say, can you summarize that meeting for me? And it's going to be a really useful tool for that kind of capability in terms of taking a lot of information, summarizing that information, and spitting out something for you at the end that will just make your life a little bit easier.
Yeah, so it's driving efficiencies, isn't it?
Absolutely,
being able to say, at the end of a meeting, it takes me 15 minutes to summarise it, but actually that's all now done for me. So that 15 minutes is now back for me to do something else. And the ability to go and create documents from, a seed document is quite powerful, isn't it? Okay, so organisations are getting the efficiencies from it. Where's the risks? What are companies going to have to think about upfront before kind of rolling this out across the board?
So I think it's a really interesting area, this at the moment. I think it's still very early on. So I think that the idea of I don't think we have necessarily set plans on how people are going to deal with Copilot, and I think at the moment there's still a lot of adoption will be based around, well, let's turn Copilot on for some people and kind of see how we get on.
Like pilot groups.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Copilot pilots.
Copilot pilots,
Figure that out yourself. But I think it's a great question. And so there's some things that you absolutely want to think about. And actually some of it probably before you think about adopting Copilot. So if we take the efficiency stuff aside for a moment, there's just to make life more complicated, I guess. Not only is there pilot groups for Copilot, but there's not just one Copilot. So we talked about Copilot in the productivity suite. So
mix of features.
Yeah, so you might put that, like we said, in your Office suite, things like Teams. I think that summarising document stuff. I was down at Microsoft event back end of last year, and actually one of the guys there talked about how they'd used Copilot internally. They'd had a meeting, somebody came in with a 40-page report, and they said, well, we can spend the next 2 hours looking at the 40-page report, or we can whack that in Copilot, churn out the information that Copilot sees as important, and then we can talk about, does that document capture the right things? Because if Copilot is saying. So I think it was a really good example. So, but Copilot is going to work in other areas as well. So there's going to be some relatively complicated stuff that you can do with what Microsoft are calling their data fabric for Copilot. So this is the idea of pulling together disparate data sources and letting Copilot kind of build a fabric across that. And not all of these things are available right now. It's probably just worth pointing out.
Yeah.
But you'll be able to use that to pretty much point Copilot at stuff and say, go and learn things about this, and start to build data models based on that. There'll also be the ability, for example, to integrate with other third-party tools as one of those data sources. So let's say you use an external CRM system and you want to tie that with information that potentially have in SharePoint, you'll have the ability to kind of pipe those things together and get Copilot looking at this third-party source and what you're doing in SharePoint and start to bring some of that stuff together.
Yeah, okay.
And then the other Copilot that is getting a lot of coverage at the moment, and I'm not quite sure what the status will be when the show goes out, but it's Security Copilot. So, we do a lot of security episodes, and one of the things that we talk about with security is the amount of telemetry that you pull together. And you're seeing this as kind of a general trend that security organisations are starting to look at, and lots of them are calling them co-pilots, are looking at how do we help users more quickly ascertain the risk priority.
Yeah.
And so I know none of this is answering your question, by the way, and we'll get there. But it is, and so you'll see that. So Microsoft using that to look at things like Sentinel and say, well, how do we help a user use natural language to maybe query potential, when they're doing threat hunting or investigation, how do we use natural language to help them do that?
I like that though, because when you look at cybersecurity, especially Azure Sentinel, you've got to be able to write the queries, and that's a skill set.
Yeah.
Being able to use natural language and say, what are the things I need to be aware of, and you get the information out, that's really powerful.
And you're seeing that more broadly across the sector. So I've done some work with a couple of vendors who are using exactly that for that reason. So make the natural language query. Yes, I like the results. Can you now turn that into a task or an event that I can go and look for? So, these things, and again, all kind of fall into productivity and efficiency.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately, these kind of Copilot tools are for exactly that. They exist for, they don't exist to necessarily change the world and invent stuff for you. What they exist for in this scenario is the ability to bring together and work more efficiently with the information that you've got to help you do your job more quickly.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, I remember we spoke in our Christmas episode a couple of months back around kind of how AI was the theme of 2023, but other than kind of ChatGPT, and people using it to do homework and whatever, there wasn't that kind of killer standout app. And I think that Microsoft Copilot looks to be the first commercial interesting app for organizations to say, this is AI put into business use that we can use now and consume. It's like AI as a service kind of thing.
Well, you asked, and I think you're absolutely right. I 100% agree. I think Copilot is going to start to take this kind of generative AI into organisations in ways they wouldn't have done previously.
Absolutely.
But this goes back to kind of your question you asked me 5 minutes ago that I still haven't answered, which is about
it's a sign of a good question.
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, it's almost a politician's answer. Yeah. Let me answer the question I wanted to answer. But you asked about what are the things that you might want to put in place or should put in place before considering rolling out Copilot.
Yeah.
And I think there's some important things that you'll want to do. And again, I've had this conversation more broadly with some other vendors in the industry as well, and some CTOs about what are the considerations. So there's things that you want to definitely consider before you use any kind of AI model, and that is, what am I feeding it? So if the information that's going to push out. So even if we're using that in its kind of simplest form as a help me write a thing about a thing, if you're teaching that model based on information that's out of date, no longer relevant, incorrect, so I was listening to a thing yesterday actually about, and sorry if I get the airline wrong, so apologies to Air Canada if this wasn't you, but they were talking about they've just lost a court case based on somebody who'd had a flight with them, had a flight and had to make the flight for personal reasons. A member of the family had passed away, so they were making kind of a very short term. And apparently, the airline had a policy that if you were making a flight for that reason, that you could reclaim some of the cost. Okay. So basically, they went into their AI engine that was on their website, their AI chatbot, asked this question, it came back with some information, they made a claim. The airline, and I'm still going to blame Air Canada even if it wasn't them, you have to look this up yourselves, but the airline's response was, oh, well, the information from the chatbot was out of date. And they basically tried to claim that the chatbot was a separate legal entity and was nothing to do with them, so that they wouldn't honour it. Now, the court overruled that and said, well, you will. Yeah. But it was a really good example of actually if you put the wrong information inside of your AI engine and you get the wrong outputs, then that has real potential business impact for you, in that you are potentially promising and telling customers things that you
that's
don't.
Right, yeah, because the chatbot is being used as a service representative, essentially. A digital equivalent of picking up the phone and getting the wrong information, isn't it? I saw that story actually. I can't remember which airline it was, but I think that the ruling, and this is probably a different podcast actually, was that the organisation is legally bound to whatever the chatbot is saying, because that's providing the customer information, isn't it?
Saying that importantly, that we're not lawyers, so just before anybody asks.
Take no legal guidance from anything that we say.
Definitely, don't ask us to do the conveyancing on your house.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the part of what you was asking about, what are some of the other things you want to take into account? So I think the other thing that's important is for organisations to realise, kind of to build data guardrails around some of this stuff. So I think one of the fears, and we won't have seen instance of this yet, but potentially we will, is the idea that we are allowing Copilot to look at a whole bunch. Microsoft are putting guardrails in place to reduce this risk, but the idea that Copilot is seeing a bunch of information inside of your SharePoint, your email, Teams, wherever it's looking, particularly when you start building out some of these kind of fabrics, that is seeing information and potentially surfacing that information to people who shouldn't see that information in the first place.
That's right. Yeah.
So there should be some place in terms of permission, so that actually they don't have rights to look at that information. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a possibility that that information exists in places where it shouldn't. So I think there's I suppose if I was to give one tech takeaway from this,
I mean, we're called tech takeaways for a reason.
Yeah, for a reason indeed. So probably if maybe to give two, if you're going to do this, is to think about how you're going to use this technology. So I think the how is important. What are you going to use it for? What do you think it's going to deliver? And then take a look at that. And I know some of this will be, well, I don't really know. And maybe there is a piece where you do a pilot Copilot, and you look at that and say, well, these are the things we could do. Now let's understand that and formalize it. So I think that's great. But secondly is to probably, you need to be able to do that kind of data cleansing exercise, that piece around governance, compliance, understand what data I have, what's in that data, who has access to it. Some of that stuff you can do natively inside of 365. Some of that you might want some separate tooling, and we can talk about that another time. But I think it's those two things: know what you're trying to do and who should be able to do it, and then understand what is the data that I'm going to be feeding into Copilot, and is that the data I want feeding into Copilot?
And I think for organisations that are looking to get set up with Copilot, maybe give it a try, maybe have some concerns about it, they can reach out to us, and we can support with that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Happy to chat about it, and I think we've got some events coming up where we're going to do some stuff on Copilot as well.
Yeah. So great episode. So we hope that you've enjoyed this episode on Microsoft Copilot. Stand by for events that Gardner Systems will be promoting over the next few months on this. It's a really hot topic. Subscribe to the podcast. So there should be a link just below on YouTube if you're watching it live. Click on the subscribe so that you don't miss an episode. And we're available everywhere where you get your podcasts.